The sunrise on Varel 5 was always calm, always golden, always gentle. Light washing over blue mountains and quiet cities where no one had ever known real war. No one had ever imagined fear greater than storms or earthquakes. And as the first rays touched the shimmering spires of the capital, people walked through markets, children laughed in the streets, workers prepared for another normal day, completely unaware that history was about to break. Reality was about to shatter, and every belief their species held about the universe was moments away from dying. In the planetary command tower, officers sipped morning coffee, joking, relaxed, bored with routine scans that never detected anything bigger than a cargo shuttle, until suddenly every screen flickered, every holo display glitched, every radar froze mid-pulse, alarms went silent, and the room sank into a terrifying stillness, the kind that doesn't feel like a malfunction but like the universe itself holding its breath. At first no one spoke. No one moved. The chief officer tapped his console, annoyed, thinking it was just a glitch. But then every scanner rebooted at the same time and displayed the same message in bright, pulsing red letters: object in orbit. One object. No details. No shape. No origin. Just the warning. Confusion swept through the room. Technicians rushed to controls. Officers began barking orders. Scan it again. Identify power signature. Request visual. But the scanners lagged, loading painfully slow, as if whatever waited in orbit was too massive to measure. When the image finally appeared, every voice died. On the main hologram floated a colossal black silhouette, so large it blocked part of the sun. A giant shape with impossible edges, no visible engines, no familiar design, just a dark fortress hanging in space like a silent monster watching the planet. Gasps rippled across the room. Soldiers stared in disbelief. One officer whispered, "Is that a ship?" But no one answered, because no ship in the galaxy was that size. Not Varelian, not Imperial, not any known species. Before they could process the horror, the scanners pinged again. Second object detected, and another massive shape appeared beside the first, then a third, then a fourth, multiplying like shadows spreading across the sky until the sun itself seemed to dim. And the capital streets fell silent as people lifted their eyes, frozen in terror, watching the heavens turn darker and darker. In homes, in schools, on rooftops, billions stared upward as the sky changed color from blue to gray to black, not from clouds, not from storms, but from something mechanical, something metallic, something alive with cold purpose. Panic erupted. Civilians screamed. Sirens wailed. Broadcasts cut to emergency alerts. The planetary government activated full defense lockdown, scrambling fleets, activating shields, calling for backup, but none of it mattered, because the scanners were still counting, still detecting new objects, hundreds, then thousands, then numbers so high the system crashed under the weight. Commanders shouted orders through comms: identify origin, identify faction, but every attempt returned the same result: unknown. Then, finally, the scanner pulled one more data string, one more encrypted reading, and when the identification decoded, the room fell dead silent. The label pulsed slowly on every screen. Terran signature detected. No one breathed. No one blinked. Terran. As in Terra. As in Earth. As in humans. But that was impossible. Humans were myths, stories from ancient ruins, whispers in old star maps, tales about a species that once rose like wildfire and vanished without a trace 10,000 years ago. Children grew up hearing bedtime legends. Humans were giants of war. Humans tamed the stars. Humans built machines that shook galaxies. But every historian dismissed them, every scientist laughed, every leader claimed humans never existed. They were fairy tales, ghost stories, nothing more. And yet here, hanging above their world, blocking the sun, filling the sky, were objects carrying a signature billions knew only from myth. In the capital's Grand Archive, an elderly historian named Reth Lorin stood trembling in front of an ancient stone tablet, one carved with symbols no one had decoded in centuries. He had studied human legends his entire life, mocked by scholars, ignored by leaders, told his research was pointless. But when the emergency broadcast screamed Terran signature, he felt his heart stop. His hands shook as he traced the dusty carvings and whispered, "They were real all along." Tears filled his eyes, Not of fear, but of revelation. The universe had lied. History had been wrong. Humans were not myth. Humans existed. Back in the command tower, chaos spiraled. The planetary defense fleet launched, pushing through the atmosphere toward orbit. But as the first fighters reached the upper sky, their pilots screamed in panic. The objects were bigger than anyone imagined. Each one a massive armored vessel, kilometers long, hulls black as night, edges sharp and silent, like leviathans forged from darkness. The pilot of the lead fighter choked as he whispered into the comm. "These aren't stations. These are dreadnoughts." No one spoke. No one denied it. The word dreadnought had not been used in centuries, reserved only for the largest, deadliest weapons of legend, and yet these colossal ships dwarfed even the strongest Imperial war machines. Then something worse happened. The dreadnoughts moved. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just a slow, synchronized rotation, as if all of them turned their attention toward Varel 5 at the exact same moment. Billions felt it. A pressure in the air. A weight in the sky. A presence. Children cried. Soldiers froze. Commanders lost their voices. And then, every comm device, every holoscreen, every speaker across the planet sparked with static, like a whisper crawling into every ear, and a cold, mechanical pulse echoed through global communication systems. 1 beat. 2 beats. 3 beats. Then silence. The kind of silence that feels alive. The kind that feels like someone, or something, is listening. In orbit, one dreadnought drifted forward, breaking formation. It was larger than the others. Taller. Wider. Its hull marked with faded ancient lettering, unreadable to modern eyes. The scanners tried to identify it, but every attempt returned the same terrifying message: classification, beyond known scale. As it approached, Varel 5's orbital defense grid flickered, overloaded by the sheer mass of the object. Shields failed. Weapons shut down. The planet was defenseless without a single shot fired. Inside the dreadnought's shadow, the sky looked like endless night. People fell to their knees, praying, panicking, pleading to the stars. The Varelian Chancellor, pale and shaking, addressed the galaxy through a trembling broadcast. If there is intelligence aboard, we seek peace. We mean no harm." Her voice cracked with raw fear, but there was no reply. The dreadnoughts remained silent, motionless, watching. And that silence was worse than any threat. Silence meant power. Silence meant control. Silence meant humanity didn't need to speak to be feared. In the darkest corners of the galaxy, watching from distant systems, alien empires whispered the same words with shaking voices: "Humans are real." And for the first time in thousands of years, the universe felt small, weak, breakable. Because if these dreadnoughts truly belonged to humans, if humans were back, then every story, every legend, every warning ever carved into ancient walls might be true. Humans didn't just shake the stars. Panic spread through Varel 5 like wildfire, not loud at first but quiet and crushing, the kind of fear that steals breath before it steals voice. And inside the command tower, every officer felt it tightening around their hearts as they stared at the impossible fleet above them, their minds refusing to accept what their eyes could clearly see. Because if those colossal ships were truly Terran, if they were truly human, then the galaxy had been living a lie for thousands of years, believing humans were gone, believing humanity was only a story. But the silence of the dreadnoughts felt heavier than any weapon, like a judgment, like an unseen gaze staring down at them. And the chief commander tried to speak, tried to calm his trembling voice, but the only words he managed were a broken whisper: "Why now? Why return now?" And no one could answer, because no one knew if this was salvation or doom. In the streets below, civilians crammed into shelters while others froze outside, staring upward in tear-filled terror as the sky turned darker, thicker, more suffocating, every dreadnought blocking another patch of sunlight until the world felt trapped under a ceiling of steel. And parents held their children close, shaking, whispering lies like it will be okay, even though they didn't believe it themselves. Because how could anything be okay when the universe's greatest myth had suddenly become real? High above the panic, the Varelian defense fleet struggled into orbit, a small formation of cruisers and frigates that looked laughably tiny beside the monstrous dreadnoughts. and the fleet captain, a decorated veteran named Taran Vos, stared in numb disbelief at the dark giant filling his viewport, his voice breaking as he whispered, "We're ants beside a mountain." And even though protocol demanded he issue commands, order scans, prepare weapons, he couldn't bring himself to do any of it. Because some instinct older than training told him that raising a weapon against something so massive would be as pointless as throwing stones at a star. His second-in-command, voice tight with fear, asked, "Should we contact the Empire?" And Taran finally forced his voice to steady long enough to answer, "We already did. They're watching. They're just as scared as us," and that truth felt like a punch to the chest. The Empire, the greatest power in the galaxy, was afraid too. Across the stars, on distant broadcasting networks, alien anchors stuttered through emergency reports, experts debated in panicked tones, and old historians frantically searched ancient archives, comparing symbols, designs, myths, trying to prove or disprove the unthinkable. But every signal, every reading, every ancient reference pointed to the same answer. Humanity had once built ships like gods, fought like legends, vanished without explanation, and some believed they left behind weapons the galaxy could never hope to match. And now those stories didn't feel like fantasies anymore. They felt like warnings. Back on Varel 5, deep beneath the capital in a hidden vault, Chancellor Arya Solis stood before a massive holographic map flickering with images of the sky, her breathing sharp and uneven as she listened to the terrified voices of her advisors, some begging her to surrender, others urging her to flee, others demanding she fire first to show strength. But all she could do was stare at the map, at the impossible scale of the ships above her world, and she realized in a painful flash that nothing she did mattered. The Dreadnoughts could destroy Varel 5 with a single command if they wanted to, and the Chancellor felt tears sting her eyes as she whispered to herself, "What are you?" Because she didn't know if she was looking at executioners, conquerors, or something far worse. She stepped forward and activated the global broadcast, her voice shaking as she spoke to her terrified planet. "We do not know their intentions, but we will not provoke them. We will not attack. We will not give them reason to see us as enemies." And her message spread across every screen, but it did not calm anyone. It only deepened the helplessness, because they all understood that peace was not a choice they could make. It was a choice only the Dreadnoughts could. Meanwhile, in the defense fleet, Captain Taran's ship moved closer to the largest dreadnought, drawn toward it like a helpless moth to a star, and as they drifted beneath its enormous shadow, the crew fell silent, breathless, shaken, because up close the ship was even more terrifying. Its armor was scarred, ancient, covered in markings no one could translate, and the scanners showed its power core was so vast it didn't even register as a normal energy source. It read like a miniature star trapped inside metal. Then, without warning, a soft vibration rippled through the fleet. A low hum that made every console flicker, every hull tremble, every heart pound. And Taran grabbed the armrest of his chair, eyes wide, whispering, "It's waking up." The Dreadnought's lights ignited one by one in long glowing veins across its hull, like a sleeping titan opening its eyes, and the hum grew deeper, heavier, pulsing like a heartbeat, and for the first time the fleet truly understood. This was not a relic. It was alive with purpose. And then the most terrifying thing happened. Not an attack, not a weapon firing, not destruction, just a single shift. The Dreadnought turned. Slowly, deliberately, its colossal form angling downward until its bow pointed directly at Varel 5, directly at the planet's heart, directly at billions of terrified lives, and every officer, every soldier, every civilian felt the same cold thought stab through them. Humans had not just returned. Humans were looking, watching, choosing, and no one knew what choice they would make. The galaxy had always laughed at human legends. Now the galaxy could only tremble beneath them. The Dreadnought's slow turn felt like the universe shifting its weight, a silent decision being made above an entire world, and everyone on Varel 5 felt it. Not as a sound, not as a warning, but as pressure in their chests, a crushing heaviness that made breathing difficult, as if the very air understood the danger before any mind could process it. And in the defense fleet's command deck, Captain Taran clutched the railing, eyes wide, throat dry, watching the colossal vessel angle itself toward the planet like a god lowering its gaze, and every instinct inside him screamed to flee, to run, to hide, but he couldn't move, he couldn't speak, He could only stare in helpless awe as the Dreadnought's lights brightened along its hull like veins filling with power, and the hum, low and rhythmic, echoed through the void, making the tiny fleet shudder as though the massive ship wasn't just waking up but remembering something ancient, something heavy, something dangerous. On the surface, civilians collapsed to their knees in streets, some crying, some whispering prayers, some frozen in shock, because the Dreadnought didn't feel like a machine. It felt like a presence, a living force that had chosen to reveal itself after millennia of silence, and the Chancellor, staring at the live feed from orbit, felt tears run down her face in pure terror because she finally understood the scale. If this single ship chose to fire, Varel 5 would be gone before anyone could scream, gone before any defense system could activate, gone like dust in sunlight. Deep inside the command tower, the Emergency War Council argued in frantic whispers, voices shaking, hands trembling, some insisting they launch missiles to show strength, others begging to surrender immediately. But all of them knew the truth they were too afraid to say aloud. Nothing they did mattered, no weapon they possessed could scratch that giant, no shield could withstand it, no negotiation meant anything if humanity chose to ignore them. And when an advisor finally broke down, shouting, "We are already dead if they want us dead," the room fell into horrified silence because everyone felt the same thing in their bones. They were living in borrowed seconds. The Dreadnought's hum grew louder, deeper, vibrating through the hulls of the orbiting ships, making consoles glitch and lights flicker, and when the sensory officer on Taryn's ship checked the readings, her voice turned to a thin, shaky whisper, "Power levels, rising exponentially." And Taryn felt his heart bend under fear as he croaked, "It's charging something." But even that word felt too small, too simple, too harmless to describe the massive energy building inside the Terran vessel. An energy so vast the scanners couldn't quantify it. Only return a single horrifying reading, beyond scale. And then the Dreadnought spoke. Not through speakers. Not through comm channels. Not through any known communication system. A single pulse echoed through every device, every ship, every screen, every implanted neural link. A pulse that formed into a voice, calm, cold, impossibly human. Terran Vessel 01 Sol, online. The words hit the galaxy like a hammer. Terran. Vessel. Sol. Sol. The ancient name of the human star system. A system believed dead. A star believed abandoned. A species believed extinct. But here was proof. Simple, undeniable, terrifying. Humanity had never been gone. They had been silent. Waiting. Watching. Preparing. The officers on the bridge stumbled back from their consoles, some choking on breath, some shaking uncontrollably, because hearing a human voice, a real human voice, was like hearing a ghost speak through time, a myth stepping out of legend and into reality, and Captain Taryn felt his knees weaken as he whispered, "Humans still exist." All across the planet, broadcasts failed, screens glitched, communication grids overloaded as the Terran voice repeated its declaration. And for billions of people who had grown up hearing stories of humans as monsters, heroes, conquerors, protectors, no one knew which story was true, and that confusion twisted into fear so sharp it felt like a blade pressed against the soul. In the Grand Archive, old historian Reth Lorin sank against a wall, tears blurring his vision, hands clutching ancient scrolls he had spent decades studying, and he whispered, voice breaking, "They survived, they survived." But even he did not know whether that was a blessing or a curse. Then the Dreadnought moved again, its colossal hull shifting, panels separating, forming shapes no Varelian engineer could identify, like wings unfolding or armor opening, revealing a faint glow deep inside its core, swirling like a contained star, and every scanner screamed warnings, energy spikes, gravitational anomalies, unstoppable readings, and the Chancellor stared at the feed with a trembling voice, "Is it a weapon?" And no one dared answer because the truth was too terrifying. Whatever was awakening inside that ship made every weapon in the galaxy look like toys. Captain Taryn forced himself to speak, his voice cracking, "Terran vessel. This is Varel 5 Defense Fleet. We request communication. We request intention. Please respond." But the Dreadnought gave no reply, no acknowledgement, only that growing energy and that silent, suffocating focus, as if the world below was under inspection, under judgment, under evaluation by something ancient and intelligent. Then, as the Dreadnought's lights reached their brightest point, the hum suddenly stopped, cut off mid-pulse, plunging space into eerie stillness, and for a single heartbeat the universe felt frozen, and then, more objects appeared, not slowly this time. Not one by one, but in a cascading burst of hyperspace ruptures, hundreds of portal-like distortions ripping open across the upper atmosphere, each one spitting out another colossal Terran dreadnought, then another, the sky filling with steel until sunlight vanished entirely, the world plunged into shadow, and every soul on Varel 5 felt their hearts collapse into dread as scanners struggled to keep up, numbers climbing into the thousands. Then 10,000. And the feed from orbit captured a sight so overwhelming that generations would speak of it in whispers. The entire sky, lined with Terran warships. Not one myth. Not one relic de an armada. Humanity had not returned alone. Humanity had returned as a force. The sky was gone. There were no stars, no sunrise, no horizon. Only a ceiling of endless metal. 10,000 silent dreadnoughts. Stacked layer upon layer like a colossal steel storm hanging over Varel 5, and the darkness they cast wasn't just physical. It was emotional, suffocating. A weight pressing down on every living being until the entire planet felt like it was trapped beneath a giant hand. Unable to breathe, unable to think, unable to hope. And in the command tower the officers stared at the live feed in stunned horror, their faces pale, their bodies shaking. Because one dreadnought had already shattered their understanding of power, but 10,000 was something beyond imagination, beyond logic, beyond any nightmare their minds had ever dared to create. Captain Taran couldn't move, couldn't blink, his heart thundering against his ribs as he whispered, This isn't a fleet. This is a civilization. And the realization stabbed every officer around him like ice, because no empire, no species, no faction had ever built a force this size. If humans possessed 10,000 dreadnoughts, then humanity was not a remnant, not a survivor species, not a scattered ghost. They were an empire unto themselves, a superpower hidden in the dark, and the galaxy had been blind. Far below in the city streets, people clung to each other, staring upward with wide, tear-filled eyes as the formations shifted, thousands of ships moving with impossible precision. Not chaotic, not drifting, but synchronized, turning in perfect geometric patterns like a single organism. And the sight alone broke something inside the viewers, because no fleet in known history could move like that, not even the Imperial legions, not even the machine empires of the outer fringe. Nothing. This wasn't coordination, it was unity, and mothers hugged their children tighter. Fathers shook uncontrollably, and entire crowds dropped into fearful silence because something ancient in their instincts whispered that no species should be capable of such perfect order unless they had evolved beyond fear, beyond chaos, beyond anything mortal. Chancellor Arya felt her voice fail as she watched the dreadnoughts fill every inch of her display, her hand pressed against the glass screen like she was trying to touch the nightmare to prove it was real, and she could barely force out a whisper, "Why would they need so many?" And none of her advisors responded, because the only answers that came to mind were too terrifying to speak. Either humans expected a war unlike anything ever seen, or they had already fought it. Then something even more unsettling happened. The dreadnoughts weren't just floating. They were watching. Slowly, deliberately, the formation tightened, thousands of ships angling downward until every single bow pointed toward Varel 5, and the motion was so synchronized, so controlled, so intentional that the entire planet gasped as one. A collective shudder rippling through billions of bodies as if their souls understood before their minds did. These ships were focusing, selecting, targeting. Captain Taran felt his throat close, fear choking him as he whispered, "We're the center." Because the armada hadn't spread across the system, hadn't scanned space, hadn't moved toward other worlds. It had zeroed in on one planet, one location, one purpose, and that purpose was Varel 5. In orbit, defense ships drifted helplessly, dwarfed by the monstrous walls of Terran steel, and when a junior sensor officer croaked, voice trembling, "Are they preparing to fire?" The bridge fell into terrified silence, because the thought was too colossal, too devastating, too absolute. 10,000 dreadnoughts didn't need to fire to win a battle. They didn't need to fire to destroy a world. They didn't need to fire to erase an empire. They could simply exist, and existence alone was enough to crush hope. Taran forced his shaking hand to reach for the comm and uttered a broken plea. "Terran fleet, This is Varel 5 Defense Command. We request clarification. We request intention. We request mercy. But all that came through the speakers was static, cold, and endless, and that silence hurt more than any threat, because it made one truth echo in every terrified mind. Humans did not need to speak to decide the fate of a world on the ground. Historian Reth Lorin staggered through the archive halls, clutching ancient relics with trembling hands, his heart racing with equal parts fear and awe, and he gasped, "The legends. They said humans disappeared after building an army too powerful to control." And as he stared at the sky filled with steel, he whispered the rest of the forgotten tale, voice breaking, "They didn't disappear, they withdrew." And that realization spread like a cold wind through the deepest chambers of his soul. Humanity had never lost power. They had hidden it, preserved it, multiplied it, and now they had returned not as ghosts, not as ruins, but as a force so overwhelming it made every empire look like a fragile child. Then, without warning, the largest dreadnought, the first one, the colossal leviathan that had arrived before all others, shifted forward, breaking the perfect formation, moving closer to Varel 5 with a slow, deliberate grace that felt heavier than any attack, and as its shadow deepened across the planet, every scanner on Varel 5 flickered with the same chilling message, primary Terran flagship in motion, and Captain Terran felt his knees weaken as he choked. Flagship, meaning there's a command, a leader, and the thought of a human commander somewhere inside that steel giant, watching them, judging them, sent a tremor of raw terror through every soul. The flagship descended lower, its hull lighting up with ancient Terran symbols that pulsed like a heartbeat, and the glow reflected across oceans, across mountains, across cities, until the entire planet shimmered under the reflection of human power, and then, every dreadnought stopped. Motionless. Silent. Waiting for what? Waiting for who? A dread so deep, so primal, so suffocating filled the air that even children stopped crying, not because they felt safe, but because they felt something bigger than fear, something older than instinct, something that whispered across their skin like a cold breath. The silence that followed was the kind that crushed the soul, a silence so deep and heavy it felt like the planet itself had stopped breathing, like time had paused, like the universe was waiting for a verdict that no one could escape, and across Varel 5 that silence seeped into every home, every bunker, every war room, every trembling heart, until even the panicked screams faded into quiet whimpers, then into nothing, because when 10,000 dreadnoughts pointed at one world and then fell still, the only thing left was fear. Captain Terran stood frozen on his command deck, hands shaking so violently he had to grip the railing just to stay upright. His eyes locked on the massive flagship that hovered closest, its hull glowing with slow, pulsing light like the beating heart of some ancient beast, and he felt a horrible, dawning realization that this wasn't just a fleet arriving by accident. This wasn't random. This wasn't exploratory. Varel 5 had been chosen. And no one knew why. Then the sensors flickered. Just once. A soft, glitch-like blink that barely registered before stabilizing again. But the moment it did, every console on every defense ship displayed one message in towering red letters. Global scan initiated. Panic erupted on the bridge. Officers gripped their consoles, shouting, "They're scanning us. Shields can't block it. They're inside our systems." But the terror wasn't in the words. It was in the truth behind them. The scan wasn't coming from one ship. It was coming from all of them. 10,000 dreadnoughts scanning every city, every structure, every heartbeat on Varel 5, sweeping through the atmosphere like an invisible wave, penetrating every network, every satellite, every hidden bunker, as if humanity wasn't searching for information, but confirmation on the surface. Civilians dropped to their knees as their wrist comms, screens, datapads, and holo panels lit up with the same single symbol. An ancient Terran insignia, a broken ring encircling a star, and though no one knew what it meant, the feeling it carried was undeniable: judgment. Historian Reth Lorin clutched his chest as he stared at the symbol, his mind racing through centuries of lost texts, half-translated fragments, forbidden myths, and suddenly he remembered a forgotten line carved into a ruin older than recorded history. When the starring returns, the reckoning begins. The old man collapsed into a chair, breath shaking, tears filling his eyes, because in that moment he understood something horrifying. Humans hadn't vanished. They had withdrawn to prepare. Not for war against other species, but for something far worse. And the galaxy had never been ready to end the underground command bunker. Chancellor Arya felt her heart pound so hard it hurt, watching the data stream rush across her screens. Every Terran ship gathering unimaginable amounts of information, mapping their biology, technology, population, history, like a silent interrogation of an entire civilization, and she whispered, voice cracking, "Are they deciding if we live?" The question hung in the stale air like a blade, and none of her advisors dared to speak, because the truth was too brutal. Humanity didn't need negotiation, didn't need diplomacy, didn't need permission. If 10,000 dreadnoughts wanted Varel 5 erased, the planet would be dust before its people finished screaming. Up in orbit, Captain Taran watched helplessly as his sensors overloaded with readings, gravity distortions, quantum fluctuations, signals so advanced they didn't match any known language or physics, and amid the chaos he noticed something chilling. The flagship wasn't scanning defensively. It was searching. Focused. Intent. Its beam locked onto a single location on the planet, an abandoned excavation site buried deep in the desert. Taran's breath caught. "They're not here for us," he whispered. "They're here for something on Varel 5. And that realization sent a new kind of fear through the fleet, not fear of destruction, but fear of purpose. Humans had returned with intention. Humans were following a trail older than recorded history. Then, without warning, every dreadnought's lights dimmed at once. The skies flickered. Power levels dropped into eerie darkness. For one long, suffocating moment the armada looked like a dead wall of steel, until a single beam of white light shot down from the flagship, stabbing through clouds and atmosphere, hitting the desert like lightning. The shockwave rippled across the planet, rattling cities, shaking oceans, knocking people off their feet, and every sensor exploded with readings as a massive structure, buried deep beneath sand and rock, began to glow. The world watched in paralyzed horror as the ground in the desert cracked open, splitting like a wound, sand erupting into the air as something enormous, ancient and mechanical, began to rise from the depths. Towers. Platforms. A massive ring-like structure carved with Terran symbols no one had seen in living memory. Captain Taran stared in disbelief, whispering, "Humans were here, before us." Silence followed, then the flagship spoke, not to one ship, not to one leader, but to every mind, every screen, every voice channel on Varel 5 in a calm, emotionless tone. "This world holds what we lost." The words hit harder than any weapon. What they lost. What could humanity, builders of 10,000 dreadnoughts, possibly lose? Chancellor Arya felt the blood drain from her face as she whispered, "They didn't come to conquer us, they came to reclaim something." And suddenly the greatest fear wasn't death, that it was the truth. If this was only the beginning, what else had humanity hidden beneath the stars, and why had they returned now? The dreadnoughts remained still, silent, waiting. The words, "This world holds what we lost," echoed through every speaker, every comlink, every silent room, and for a long, paralyzing moment it felt as if the entire planet forgot how to breathe. Because no one understood the meaning, no one understood the purpose, no one understood what humans, beings powerful enough to darken a sky with 10,000 dreadnoughts, could possibly have misplaced, and why they would return after thousands of years to find it here. Captain Taran stood frozen on his command deck, staring at the glowing desert fissure, his voice trembling as he whispered, "Lost? What?" But even as he said it, he felt a deeper fear rising in his chest, a fear that what humanity had lost wasn't technology or territory. It was something far worse. The desert wound widened, rocks splitting apart like the planet itself was being forced open, sand roaring upward in swirling storms as enormous metal structures rose from the depths. Pillars, arches, platforms, each carved with ancient Terran symbols that pulsed in rhythm with the flagship's heartbeat-like glow. The ground shook violently, sending shockwaves across the surface, knocking vehicles onto their sides, toppling statues, rattling skyscrapers, and civilians screamed as tremors ripped through the cities. In the Grand Archive, dusty artifacts toppled from shelves as Reth Lorin clung to a railing, tears in his eyes, whispering, "This is a Terran ruin, older than our civilization. Older than our planet's history," because he suddenly remembered forbidden texts that spoke of humans once mapping the stars, building stations on worlds that no species yet inhabited. And if that was true, Then Varel 5 was not their world at all. It was humanity's world first. In the underground bunker. Chancellor Arya felt her voice break, her hands trembling uncontrollably as she stared at the live feed from the excavation site. Massive doors made of obsidian metal slowly peeling apart like the jaws of an awakened beast, revealing a glowing chamber buried beneath the sands, and she whispered, "We have been living on top of their past," and the realization shattered her remaining strength, because if humanity laid claim to this place thousands of years before her people evolved, then Varel 5 wasn't just a target. It was a birthplace, a grave, a vault. Up in orbit, the dreadnoughts shifted, thousands of ships adjusting position in a vast, coordinated movement that rippled across the sky like a wave of steel, each one angling downward toward the excavation site, forming a colossal halo around the desert. Captain Taran's sensors picked up a new signal, one unlike anything recorded in modern history, an energy signature that pulsed from the buried structure into the flagship, then into the entire Terran fleet, like a chain connecting past to present, knowledge to power. The science officer choked on her words. "It's a key. The structure is a key." And Taran felt cold sweat trickle down his spine as he whispered, "A key to what?" Before anyone could guess, the flagship emitted a new command, this time not a broadcast, not a warning, but a direct activation order. The structure in the desert answered. Its lights surged bright white, spiraling upward in a tower of energy that pierced the clouds and reached the flagship like a beacon. And when the two forces connected, every Terran dreadnought lit up simultaneously, their hulls glowing like stars, their cores roaring to life with a deep, resonant hum that shook the void. Civilians collapsed, covering their ears, soldiers screamed as their weapons malfunctioned, communications overloaded, satellites exploded in orbit under the energy pressure, and the defense fleet's consoles began to spark and melt as readings spiked past comprehension. Reth Loren remembered one final line from the ancient ruins, "When the key awakens, so will the sleepers." The words hit him like a blade. Sleepers. Not machines. Not structures. Beings. He staggered backward, voice cracking, there is something else, and his heart pounded with terror as he realized the truth. The dreadnoughts might not be the greatest weapon humanity ever created. They might only be guardians protecting something even more powerful. Then, for the first time, the flagship opened a communication channel, not to the planet, not to the fleet, but to space itself, broadcasting a single message in a language older than any living species. The translation appeared automatically on every Varelian screen, "Begin retrieval." And in response, the excavation chamber's floor split open, revealing a massive, spherical object, smooth, silver, perfectly intact, rising slowly from the depths. It was enormous, the size of a city, covered in strange crystalline veins pulsing with a dim blue light. Scientists watching from orbit screamed as their scanners identified the material composition. Something not found anywhere else in the galaxy, something unbreakable, something alive. A whisper spread through the war room, through the fleet, through every trembling voice on Varel 5, "Is that a weapon?" But Captain Taran shook his head slowly, horror widening his eyes as he stared at the readings. "No, it's not a weapon, it's a vessel. A vessel. A ship. A human ship, buried for millennia beneath their world." And as the spherical vessel locked onto the flagship's signal, attaching by invisible force, the dreadnoughts shifted again, spreading outward, making space, as if preparing for something monumental. The human voice returned, calm, almost sorrowful, "We lost our own." And those words struck deeper than any fear. Lost their own? A crew? A population? A generation? A family? Chancellor Arya felt her chest tighten as she whispered, "They didn't come for territory, they came for people." And the enormity of that truth sent a tremor of emotion, grief, guilt, wonder, through every soul. Then, as the spherical vessel fully connected, the flagship gave its final command, "Prepare for awakening." The ground shook harder than ever. The lights in the vessel blazed bright. The dreadnoughts roared to full power, and for the first time, the galaxy understood something far more terrifying than human firepower. Humans had not returned for war, humans had returned for a resurrection. And whatever was about to awaken would change the galaxy forever. The word awakening didn't feel like a command. It felt like a prophecy breaking open, a door the universe had spent thousands of years pretending didn't exist. And the moment it echoed across every screen, every comm, every trembling heart on Varel 5, the world seemed to pulse with a new and terrible energy, as if the planet itself understood what was coming long before any living mind did. The spherical vessel, silver, colossal, pulsing with blue veins, rose fully from the desert fissure, suspended in midair by a force no one could explain, its surface shimmering like a living star trapped in metal, and as it ascended, the sandstorm around it died instantly, replaced by a deathly, unnatural stillness. Sound vanished. Wind vanished. Even the air felt frozen, heavy, charged. Civilians gathered miles away stared in horror, unable to move, unable to blink, because the vessel didn't look like a machine, it looked like an egg. A tomb. A seed. Up in orbit, the 10,000 dreadnoughts shifted formation again, spreading outward in a massive circular pattern around the planet. Each ship locking into precise position as if forming a colossal seal, a barrier, a wall protecting the awakening below. Captain Taran's heart pounded so violently he felt faint, his breath shallow as he stared at the long-range scans, his voice cracking into a whisper. They're forming a perimeter, as if they're expecting something dangerous. And the science officer beside him shook her head in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. Not dangerous to them, dangerous to us. And the truth of that statement hit the entire bridge like a cold knife. Humanity wasn't protecting Varel 5. Humanity was containing whatever was inside that ancient vessel in the bunker. Chancellor Arya's advisors argued frantically, some demanding evacuation, others begging to surrender, others insisting they reach out again to plead for mercy. But Arya could only stare at the swirling blue light inside the vessel, her voice trembling. We are not part of this. We never were. Because she finally understood the unbearable truth. Varel 5 wasn't the center of their own history. They were standing on someone else's unfinished story, someone else's battlefield, someone else's grave. And now the rightful owners had come home. The spherical vessel began to crack, not in chaos, not in an explosion, but in controlled, deliberate seams that glowed brighter and brighter, opening like petals made of metal, revealing a blinding white core pulsing with something no scientist could classify. The scanner readings went insane. Quantum spikes, gravitational fluctuations, signals far beyond known physics, until the numbers broke and the screens went blank, unable to measure what they were seeing. The core wasn't power. It was consciousness. A presence so vast it made every living being on the planet feel microscopic, insignificant, like shadows in the path of a rising sun. Historian Reth Lorin collapsed to his knees in the archive, clutching ancient texts to his chest, and through shaking breath he whispered the final forgotten line he once dismissed as myth. The firstborn were never dead, only sleeping. And as the words left his lips, he began to sob, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of truth. The firstborn. The original Terrans. The beings who created humanity's earliest empires. Not ships. Not machines. People. A lost generation trapped in stasis, buried when the galaxy was still young. The flagship emitted a new signal, different from the others, deep, resonant, not technological but almost biological. A heartbeat. One thundering pulse that rippled through the dreadnoughts, then through the vessel, then through the planet itself. Civilians screamed as the ground vibrated under their feet, as if something enormous beneath them was taking its first breath in thousands of years. Captain Taran grabbed the edge of his console, eyes wide with terror, whispering, "Something is waking up inside that ship." On the surface, the vessel's core flared with white fire, and every Terran dreadnought responded, activating shields, weapons, engines, not in aggression but in preparation, as if bracing for a force too powerful to predict. Chancellor Arya watched in helpless awe as her screens flickered with one final translated message from the flagship. "They are our beginning." And the words shattered whatever remained of her courage. Beginning. Not soldiers. Not weapons. Founders. Ancestors. The original seed of human civilization. And if they were waking up, the galaxy was about to witness something older than every empire, every species, every recorded law of existence. Then, the vessel opened, light burst outward in a silent explosion, flooding the desert, turning night into day, day into something brighter than the sun. People shielded their eyes, fell to the ground, cried out in raw terror as a massive silhouette appeared inside the glowing chamber. Tall, humanoid, motionless, but radiating a presence so overwhelming it felt like standing before a god. The dreadnoughts hummed in unison. The ground trembled again. The silhouette took one slow, impossible step forward, and for the first time in recorded history, every being on Varel 5 felt a voice not in their ears, not on their screens, but directly inside their minds. Calm, ancient, terrifyingly human. How long have we slept? The planet froze, the universe froze. Because that voice didn't sound weak, that IT didn't sound confused, IT sounded powerful, awake. And aware, Captain Taran's heart shattered into pure terror as he whispered, they weren't lost, they were waiting. And in that moment, 10,000 dreadnoughts bowed their colossal hulls toward the surface, like soldiers kneeling before a king returned from death. The legend of humans had not just come back. The moment that ancient voice echoed through every mind, how long have we slept? The universe seemed to fold in on itself, as if reality had paused, stunned, unable to continue until it understood the weight of those words, and on Varel 5 billions of hearts staggered in their chests, breaths hitching, souls trembling, because the voice didn't feel distant or ghostly or weak, it felt immediate, present, towering, like the speaker was not just awake but aware of every living being listening, as if consciousness older than civilization had just opened its eyes and looked straight through time. The colossal humanoid figure stepped fully out of the vessel's glowing chamber, its form made of sleek obsidian armor fused with shimmering biometal, a fusion of flesh and technology that no species in the galaxy had ever seen, and though its face was hidden behind a smooth silver helm, everyone felt its gaze, a silent, crushing weight that made even the bravest soldiers collapse to their knees. In orbit, 10,000 dreadnoughts shifted in perfect unity, angling downward, their lights flickering like ancient stars returning to life, and Captain Taran could barely stand as he whispered, voice breaking, they're bowing to it. Because the greatest armada in history, ships more powerful than planetary armies, were not leaders, they were guardians, and whatever had awakened was their master. The science officer trembled violently, tears filling her eyes. That's not a commander, that's something older, something original. And Taran felt a shiver pierce his spine as a terrifying truth settled into his bones. This being wasn't just human. It was the first human. A founder. A progenitor. A being from the dawn of their species, preserved in stasis while the universe changed, evolved, forgot. On the surface, Chancellor Arya staggered back from the screen, hands shaking uncontrollably as the ancient figure raised one arm, slow and deliberate, and the blue-white light around the vessel dimmed in response, like a living heartbeat calming under its touch. Every device on the planet flickered, every satellite went silent, every broadcast cut off, leaving only a single, pulsing connection between the awakened being and the flagship. Then a new voice echoed, not loud, not threatening, but deep, solemn, carrying the weight of galaxies, report. And to the horror of every listener, the flagship responded instantly, its voice cold and obedient. The galaxy is fractured. Threats multiply. Humanity dispersed. Awaiting command. A strangled gasp rippled through every war room, every shelter, every trembling heart, because that exchange wasn't between equals. It was between a creator and creation. Humanity hadn't just built dreadnoughts. They had built servants, sentinels, soldiers to guard something priceless while the founders slept. Reth Lorin collapsed against a pillar in the archive, sobbing, they weren't hiding from us. They were waiting to return when needed. And as he spoke, the ancient being turned its head toward the sky. Toward the armada, toward the stars beyond, as if sensing dangers no modern species could imagine. Then the being spoke again. This time not to the Terran fleet, not to its own technology, but to the entire planet, its voice echoing through every mind like a tidal wave of quiet fury, who rules the stars in our absence? The question hit like a blade, and Chancellor Arya, barely able to breathe, whispered, the Empire, the Varelian Empire claims dominion over this sector, over many worlds. And before anyone could stop her, a connection formed, unbidden, unstoppable, between the ancient being and the Varelian network, screens across the planet flickering to show images from the Empire. Fleets parading in dominance, worlds taxed into silence, weaker species forced into servitude. And in that moment, the ancient being did not rage, did not roar, did not lash out. IT simply went still. stillness more terrifying than any weapon. Then, with a voice as calm as death itself, it spoke, "They rule without unity, without purpose, without memory." And the Terran flagship answered with unwavering certainty, "The galaxy has forgotten you." Those words shattered something deep in the ancient figure, not anger, but a grief so vast it darkened the air, the vessel's light flickering like a dying star, and for a moment every dreadnought dimmed in unison, as if sharing that sorrow. Captain Tarin felt his breath catch, tears burning behind his eyes, because the being's next whisper carried a pain that shook the soul, "Our children, lost to time." And then everything changed. The ancient figure lifted its arm toward the sky, and 10,000 dreadnoughts powered up simultaneously, engines roaring like a cosmic storm, weapons unfolding, shields blazing, the entire armada transforming from silent guardians into warforged titans ready to move. An alarm screamed across Varel 5 as gravitational shockwaves rattled the atmosphere. Tarin gripped the console in terror, shouting, "They're preparing to depart." But the science officer shook her head violently, voice breaking, "No, they're preparing to mobilize." Because the dreadnoughts weren't aiming at the planet anymore, they were aiming beyond it, toward the stars, toward a threat unseen, toward a war older than empires. The ancient being turned its gaze toward the galaxy, toward every distant system, every hidden enemy, every spreading darkness, and with a voice that shook the marrow of every living being, it issued a single command: summon the rest. The rest N01 knew what that meant. N01 wanted to, but in the endless void beyond Varel 5, space began to tremble. Thousands more signatures igniting, vast shadows emerging, hyperspace ruptures forming like sparks across the cosmos. The Terran Armada was not 10,000 ships. It was the first wave. And as the ancient being stepped forward, its voice echoing one final time through the universe, humanity rises. Every empire, every ruler, every species felt the same cold truth claw into their hearts. Humans had never been legends. Humans had been asleep, and now they were awake.